So my first lecture was on what I called the nihilism in Dostoyevsky, the feeling of collapsing the world, the language itself, but also the rebirth of the sense from the nonsense, the comedy and laughter. And this is supposed by Dostoevsky as being specific to Russians, to Orthodox religion, but most maybe, this is my position, is specific to the human being. I'm referring to Freud, who is the horizon of my theoretical path. And now I would like to say some words about the characters in Dostoevsky, and particularly as Miglena said, the place of the feminine in the work of Dostoevsky. And the title of the paper is Archipelago of Female Solitude. That you'll find it on the screen in the translation of Miglena. I apologize again for my English. I'll be obliged to read it. And if you follow it, maybe we'll understand better and we'll have a discussion in the end. In Dostoevsky's polyphony, that has been noticed and analyzed by a famous Russian theoretician, Mikhail Bakhtin. Maybe some of you know about him, and I referred to him the last time. So in this Dostoevsky's polyphony, the characters lose their contours, their porous, fleeting identities become contaminated. Love, hate, and jealousy interpenetrate, merge, or reject each other. Exchanges of glances, voices, and gestures form spaces before space. They form receptacles of indices before the putting into words and sentences, before grammar and logic. The Idiot, the famous novel, for example, is a novel about the irresistible powerlessness of ideas and characters. A ground staircase, for example, and the train station merge, the present and the past overlap. Mishkin and Rogozhin, Aglaya and Nastasia Filipovna, Nastasia, Mishkin, Rogozhin, and others lend to each other emotions and behaviors in order to capture more successfully the in-between, neither truth nor light. It is the profusion that Dostoevsky likes so much. The amount or the profusion of expressions of uncertainty, be they adverbs or adjectives or just expressions, a little bit longer than one word. He wants to stress on what is in between, what is not sure. I'm quoting one of those expressions. Without doubt, perhaps, something like that. I'm not sure that. I'm not sure what. I don't know too much, for one reason or another, for whatever reason, and so on and so on. Arriving finally to this apotheosis of uncertainty, so which is the following. We can be impressed as I was by it. It seems perfectly certain, perhaps. We see that what is doubtful, what is uncertain, is something that excites the writer. In another novel called The Ridiculous Man, who takes over from the wicked man that has been depictured in Notes from the Underground and The Idiot too, the personage knows that, this is also very interesting, as specific for Dostoevsky, being myself is a joke. So the identity is always uncertain, and even it is a joke. He does not commit suicide because of this uncertainty. which will be eventually a possibility from some excessive sort of doubt. He does not commit suicide, however, because he has the dream, it may be an hallucination, that it is possible to transmit the desire. This is something that happens to the ridiculous man. It is possible to transmit the desire, and he gives a very interesting definition of the desire. What is the desire? The living image of the impossible and the unrealizable. Here again, we are in something positive, which is the desire, but the goal is impossible, and the contradictions is always going together. Desire of the unnameable, and the jester accomplishes his preaching by making words, syntax, and logic also uncertain. They tremble. Because it unfurls between the fold of language, Dostoevsky's eroticism does not ignore the body. Because if you follow me, the question arises, if everything is uncertain, what happens with the body? He doesn't ignore the body, although some critics have said that it's difficult to see and to feel the bodies of characters, and Dostoevsky ignored the body. I think that it'd be more precise to say that Dostoevsky disseminated by seizing it and turning it into preforms, which the writer recomposes in the polyphony of his speaking being, who shake their masks. The body is not really forgotten by Dostoevsky, so in my mind, as he may lead us to believe from time to time. It is true that images of the body, portraits, and physical details are often lacking in the essential characters of his novels. Barely sketched, or on the contrary, forcefully silhouetted, they are submerged by the voice of ideas. They speak, and they give us a lot of ideas in dialogue and polyphony. The eroticism without organs, but with voices, these objects, I mean, the price of object, the Dostoevskian man, as if these characters don't have as a goal to reach some object or some subject or some idea that has contours and any certainty. They disseminate between these organs, and that's why I say this eroticism, because it's always trembling with desire, eroticism, but without organs. By means of encounter and surprises with the void, he composes improbable thresholds, frozen solitudes, fusions, and ruptures. His random progressions and chaotic homoiasis don't weave webs or rhizomes as we know them today in the modern mentality, and even less social networks. Terrified by the prohibition of incest, he dilutes himself in the confusion of the sexes. He watches the feminine in him explodes out of him. He exhausts himself in indifference. The feminine is himself. He consumes himself as a criminal or as a gambler, and he puts every sexual situation in its extremes and confusions outside of himself. Far from being absent, women and the feminine epitomize Dostoevsky's writing and impose their impregnable solitudes. However, the narrator projects himself into them. He merges with them in empathies and osmosis, so much so that he probes and descends into the identity abysses of his heroines, seems to me to reveal the troubling facets of his own personal polyphony more radically than does Flaubert's famous Madame Bovary is me. For without blurring the sexual difference into gender, female identity, like all identities in Dostoyevsky, man, woman, child, object, or idea, dissolves itself, transforms itself, and imposes itself by constructing its between body and meaning, between flesh and ideas. Inexhaustible, insolvable organization, disorganization of identities, always already altered. I will suggest to approach my comprehension of this dissemination of identity through two aspects that I consider important for the work of Dostoevsky, and particularly for the comprehension of what is identity, what is a character for him. The first one will be the status of representation according to Dostoevsky. What is to represent? How he considers philosophically and stylistically the notion of representation. And then by giving, and this will my second voice, a second path of confronting this problematic of identity, to see how considers the feminine characters, how complex, different, and close to his own identity as a writer is the feminine. Representation first now, and then femininity. Representation is structured in Orthodox Christianity, judging by the legacy of the icon, is not an image. The icon is not an image. This was my thesis that I submit to you. The first revolution in the modern destiny of the spectacle was accomplished in Byzantium in the end of the 19th century, with the triumph of what they called in Greek iconodules, which means the supporters of icons, the supporters of representation, those who sustained that it's possible to represent God and the events of the Gospels and every kind of spiritual experiments. And the iconoclasts, those who are the enemies of representation. The image made by humankind is rendered pure on condition that is practiced and received as an economy. Economy and icon come from the same root. Economy of the divine presence, which is only acceptable and inscrutable. This approach to the divine allows grasping its dispensation, its journey, its advent, but also its becoming, its mechanism, its dialect. The icon is a negotiation of the image between the invisible and the visible, and does not dissociate being from appearing, but inscribes it instead of making it seen. The icon is a grapheme. Writing is not paint, You don't see the icon. You have to kiss it, to involve yourself with all your senses in the different trace, details, graphic details of the representation. The dialectic of incarnation is inseparable from the negativity, which is in the Greek Orthodox theology called kenosis, which means the void, the emptying, the annulment, and the kenosis of God is celebrated in Christmas and particularly in Friday of Christmas, as death of God. So if you present confronting the empty, annulment, void aspect of the divinity. Subtent, which subtends and disturbs it is everything that is obvious and insists on it. It cuts into it. This co-presence of visible and invisible should be suggested by the icon. If the sense is not an image offered to our eyes, but there are some marks, some threads, some scriptures, some graphene that involve and require the participation of all the senses, their polyphony and their confusion too. The icon is a perceptible trace, not a spectacle. The icon is not a figure. Of course, Dostoyevsky's writing is also a representation, a figure, and it participates in the Western representation of the world since the Greek even lesser degree, but backed by the economy of the Orthodox icon. And therefore, Dostoevsky's writing distills Byzantine iconism into Western figurism. The dispersed corporal fragments which the novelist attributes to the characters is scattered their iconic traces in the textual polyphony. In my book, I give different examples of the small details, the nose or a kind of brow, a kind of ear, a kind of eye that is specific to a character. But we don't have the entire picture, which is exactly the iconic presentation and not the figurism. And I invite you to read the book when it will be translated. It's on translation now in Columbia Press. So from this cultural background, the psyche, which is co-present to Dostoevsky's mentalities and also he sustains it in his theoretical works, the psychosexuality of Dostoevsky directs the destructive drive towards the effective search of the same in the other. The other same, the gross zero of otherness in the same sex as oneself. This homoerotic psychic energy is specific to adolescence, a fusion destruction which precedes the choice of sexual object. The French language allows us to play with the homophony of the word same, which is même, and the expression love me, which is m'aime, je m'aime, tu m'aimes. I love me, I same. You love me, you same. So this is something that happens in this fusion, confusion of the identities, which I see now from psychoanalytic point of view and not from the point of view of the history of iconism in Dostoevsky. The life drive needs the same to ensure itself, to develop itself, to singularize itself in its way towards the other, its objects and its laws. Homoeroticism is at the foundation of subjectivation, of the fluctuating sense of this experience. The last time Katerina, I think, asked me how I understand subjectivation, and she suspected that there is a hint of Kantian moralism in this notion of subjectivation. It is possible, but not in my apprehension of this problematic. Subjectivation, in my sense, in Dostoevsky one, is also identification of the other and contribution of my proper singularity. And between them, this is also the in-between, homoeroticism, me and you, in the same sex, very, very important experience in every adolescent sexuality. Homoeroticism accompanies a substance the choice of sexual object, whether heterosexual, homosexual, transgender, or neutral, and is constructed throughout the psychosexual development of each person. We have this basis of homoeroticism, whatever our definitive or almost definitive choice of sexual object occurs in the maturity. Dostoyevsky doesn't use, of course, my word games, mem, same, I love. So I can imagine, and you can imagine that this is just my way of translation of his identification with somebody of the same sex or his projection in the sex of the other. But he doesn't deprive himself of neologisms to make different neologisms than mine in order to make discernible this sensitive area where identity shows as much as it fades. Indeed, in his diary of a writer from 1877, he evokes the fortune of a neologism of his own, introduced by him in one of his previous, very, very books from his youth, 1846, The Double, and abundantly used since then by Turgenev, who was the rival of Dostoyevsky. He could not stand and whom he admired. Here we have again this contradiction. This neologism is in Russia stushevаться, which means to disappear, to annihilate oneself. From the Russian tush, which is the same word as in German Tuch, designating India ink. The engineering student, who Dostoevsky was student of engineering, who draws various sketches, plans, and military constructions, he sketched and erased with India ink, and he excels in the art of he describes this practice by saying he was degrading a dark plan to whiteness and nothingness, imperceptible effacement in non-being. Those are quotations. Such is the evasive and elusive person, subject that young Dostoevsky was. Not only his schemas and sketches and his drawing with India ink, but the personage was evasive and elusive like them. His neologism reveals to whatever wants to get it the exquisite excitement retained in the written gesture, the depleted sound of the voice engraved in the plane of the mother tongue, the voluptuousness of being simultaneously the wound and the knife, the sharp stylet and the that scarifies me, the victim also of this scarification, the joint mastery and failure. And there's something that we found the last time when I spoke about the novel called The Gambler, and where he was a loser, but also the winner. And the more he was winner, more he was loser, in a sort of jouissance as under the sweep of the punishment. So there is a sadomasochism, is this evasement, annihilation of himself, and reaffirmation of the self also. In other words, how to annihilate oneself with fluidity. This is an expression of Dostoevsky. How to annihilate oneself with fluidity, and that's what he achieves in drawing characters. The novelistic flood carries also the triumphant expansion of unbridled sentences, not only the annihilation, but also the joy of this annihilation, the capacity to catch in a sentence the annihilation itself. Tush also means fanfare in Russian. It carries also the convulsive saraband of scorched bodies. Tushe refers to the flesh and the meat. Tushit also means to extinguish, or to suffocate. It evokes as well seduction, lure, and pleasures of the catch, or the tender pictorial technique. In French, toucher evokes the charmer when one is touché, touchant, but indicates also a profligate in faire une touche. All these clouds of meanings represent for me the meanings brush of the writing, the excitation of the jouissance of the writing. The vibration of writing imbues the characters themselves, and especially the examples that I'll give you of them after this theoretical approach to the representation, iconism from the one hand, and homoeroticism, me and the other, we are the same, we are different. Now, let me approach this by example of this iconism with its imperceptible effacement in known being through the feminine character. In the diversity of this economy of the icon, this dissemination, this destruction, reconstruction, and henceforth economy more than figure, I discern among Dostoevsky's feminine characters the proud feminine character, and slingers. The latter including the three Catherines. For those who have already read some Dostoevsky, in Crime and Punishment, Katerina Ivanovna Marmeladova, a very pathetic mother. Katerina Nikolaevna in The Adolescents. Katerina Ivanovna Verkhovenskaya in Brother Karamazov. Whether from the nobility or simple commoners, these free and tormented women, eternal phallic women, more eternal even than the eternal husband. This is a ridiculous transcription or characteristic that Dostoevsky gives to the husband that pretends to be a master, but he's never then failure master. So these phallic women also impose respect for their autonomy, although in the final account they lose power and border on the ridiculous. This happens because they don't have the fatal breath of Nastasia Philipovna. She is my favorite, and I'll speak about her in the last part of my lecture. Dostoevsky loves them, he is fascinated by them, and he does not spare them. The mothers, Kantian furies and indispensable landmarks, traverse the entire Dostoevskian carnival. They are its messengers, maybe the most memorable in the Dostoyevsky flood of narrative that were difficulties to remember, but we remember very often the mothers. Between the speechless weeping while kissing and flooding with tears the hands of church servants and the complacent grimaces when they enter the salons, between loving logoria and epistolary despair, between imploring God or the justice system and rushing for money, they are overwhelmed by interminable ordeals that they undergo for their children, small, big, and old, hanging on their breasts and their souls always until the end. Our society has no foundations, Dostoevsky warns, but it does. The writer goes looking for the foundations internally and morality in the Russian mothers, whom he never tires of praising. And this is a very interesting quotations of Dostoevsky precisely on the place of mothers in the Russian culture. I'm quoting, "The mother, a certain Russian type, a huge character, they are trampled as submissive and firm like saints." And maybe you can think about the role of the mothers of the soldiers in the recent Russian warrior acting, be it in Afghanistan or now in Ukraine, and how the power can collapse under the expression of pathos of these mothers, or how power can use them in order to reinforce his oligarchy. There is also not only old, mature maternal femininity. There is also one very interesting character, not only one, but I recall this one because it's very interesting for his multiplicity and its polyphony. It's a teenager girl. Dostoevsky called her the little devil, Liza Hochlokova in Brothers Karamazov. Her hysterical curiosity leads her to the darkest areas of nihilistic ideologies, extremist delusions, and religious persecutions. It is Liza who suddenly, with an improbable leap, which is frequently used in Dostoevsky's narrative, formulates one of those morbid and murderous fantasies that excites latent anti-Semitism and prepares for Holocaust. She says to Alyosha Karamazov, the youngest from the Dostoevsky's brothers, she says this, "Is it true that the Yeats at Easter rape children and slit their throats?" And Alyosha contents himself with saying, "I don't know." Alyosha's "I don't know" has been commented along by the readers of Dostoevsky, and some of them perceived it only as a literary device embodied in the evasiveness of just one character, the youngest of Karamazov's sons, as I said, in order to give a free rein to the polyphony dear to the author's artistic point of view. It's only a sort of a tool to provoke multiple interpretations and not to just posit ideological positions. Those who, like Dostoyevsky, want to save him, giving this interpretation. But in the background, we can hear the ideological position which Dostoevsky himself assumes in the political debate when he develops in his diary his own Jewish question, as he called it, a long essay on Jewish situation. He believes in this necessary explanation that he is full of hate-loving of Judaism. And he thus becomes an accomplice to the cause for murder of this absolute rival, the Jew, who have become superfluous foreigner and scapegoat. This is in the journal of Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky's novelistic writers, however, and on the other hand, struggles to deconstruct the psychosexual sources of this fantasy and this objection. But the personage that represents this duality is also a feminine character, the adolescent Liza. Among the other memorable characters, the feminine characters, I would be able to speak at length about my favorites. For instance, the Hobbler. I recommend you in the Demons, Maria Timofeevna Lebyadkin, who perhaps committed infanticide. Perhaps it's not sure. We are in the areas where the doubt dominates. Perhaps she committed infanticide, but she is also and permanently guilty of being a woman and not being a mother, mystically anchored in the Virgin. She is the only one also, although she's so weak, feeble, and doubtful, she is the only one to repel the pedophile nihilist Stavrogin, who insists on marrying her in fits of carnivalesque provocation. And she rejects him by throwing in his face anathema. So Hobbler, very weak, but also very heroic. This Maria Timofeevna Lebyadkin, a wonderful character. The other one of those that I appreciate very much is the Krotkaya. The English translation is the gentle creature from the eponymous short story. She is tender, fragile, humiliated in the implausible dialogue between her and him, her pawnbroker husband, which elaborates his cruel vices in the impossibility of the couple. It's a novel about the impossibility of the couple and the hate that nourishes the supposed love relationship between the spouses. And one of those that I prefer to and recommend you also is Grushenka, in the main feminine figure in Brothers Karamazov, who stands out in his archipelago of female voices. She is a mistress of the father, Fedor, but also of the son. She distances himself from Fedor, from the father, and brushes up against Alyosha, the youngest son, but finally becomes fascinated by Dmitry Karamazov, the most important of the sons. She's an innocent sinner. She actively participates in the murder of the father that structures the brother Karamazov. Without her, there is no murder of the father. She is ferocious and wild. her name is Agrafena, Grusha is a diminutive. She initiates and accompanies the resurrection of the new man in Dmitri by shouting masochistically, although she's a real master of this man, she presents herself as having a sort of masochistical sexuality. She says this: I will be your slave for life. Beat me, torture me, do whatever you like with me. End of the quote. Mitya dreams of escaping from the prison because he was accused to be the murderer of the father, which is not true. But he thinks that he could run away with Grusha to America, a sort of fantastic scenario. But finally, he says, what does she have of an American in a sort of whisper and sneers? Having done with parricide, will he reconcile the man find peace thanks to the senior's submissive, improbable fidelity of a woman, of Grushenka, could be reconciled and triumphant at the end thanks to her. The aging novelist remains a stranger to the feminist ardor, although he gives to Grushenka very complex characteristics. He is not a feminist writer. I call him aging novelist who remains stranger to the feminist ardor, and that is already emerging at the end of the century. But his archipelago of female solitudes, so diverse, so complex, but pathetic in the end, okay, are they? All these characters are completed with a knowing wing to the inexhaustible tricks of female sexuality. He is jealous of not being a woman. And it is Nastasia Philippovna, however, who best sums up the psychosexual, social, and historical accents of the feminine, according to what I call Saint Dostoyevsky. I will die soon is her motto. And let me finish by the portrait of Nastasia Philippovna. Her mother deigned to burn with the entire Barashkov estate. Nastasia Philippovna deigned to burn with her monstrous passion. She calls her passion monstrous passion, through the idiot, through the whole narrative of idiot, and with different passions with different persons. She is proud, haughty, pensive, explosive, driven, but she is not in this world. I have renounced the world. It already almost no longer exists, she says. The masochism that we are told is inherent to women culminates in an exaltation of nothingness in the deepest of being. She's entered nothingness. She is the nothingness. She enjoys nothingness. Without attachment and without a self, she's intrinsically altered. God knows what lives in me instead of me. God and nothingness. However, with her superior education, in French, of course, but also in various sciences, even in law, this fatal beauty understands an innumerable quantity of things, says the narrator. First and foremost, the value of money. This is also very interesting that Dostoevsky's women in general appreciate money, but also they govern money. There are those who are practical owners, maybe not so much, but rulers, bankers, and know how to rule the world of money. She's also a reader. She is a student of a sort, and we can find in her a painful memory of Apollinaria Suslova, who was one of the first Russian feminists and well-known Dostoyevsky's mistress. Nastasia lives in her youth. Young Nastasia lives in an atmosphere of taste and elegance, but at the price of her protector inflicting, she says, upon her what he calls the original act. He raped her. Locked in the shame of her disfigured destiny, she lives this like that. Nastasia Filipnova initially appears like a budding feminist who does not know herself, against Trotsky, her vicious benefactor. This man towards whom she nourishes an inhuman repulsion, says the narrator, especially when he tells her that he plans to arrange her marriage to a respectable civil servant whom she already knows, and to endow her with a comfortable capital so that the benefactor himself can marry without Nastasia getting into a state. So we can say that the woman object, she was dominated and raped and abused by the so-called benefactor, does not let herself be taken in, and outs her pig, as we say today, in a moving presentment of the balance ton port, as we say in French, or to me, no, me too, in the English expression that became universal now. The violated woman in Dostoevsky throws herself madly into the comedy, into worldly laughter and venomous sarcasm. Then she becomes in her turn a gambler, apparently out of disgust against the despicable benefactor. Then she becomes in her turn apparently out of disgust, out of spite, basically for nothing. By shouting at him in his face that, I'm quoting, she didn't care about anything anymore, and even less about herself, and that all her life was hanging by a thread. So he turns her destructivity towards herself. She raises the stakes, the competitors raise the stakes too. But the rebellious woman persists beneath or above the masochistic one. At least she persists in refusing the marriage, for instance. She resists also to marry Prince Idiot and lets the narrator believe that her effervescent pride is far superior to the rank of princess. In fact, Nastasia Philippovna is a seeker, but without goodness, and the kind of non-sexual love that amalgamate her with Mishkin through the mediation, among other things, of Aglaya, two women who are jealous of each other because they love the same angelic innocence. In the counterpoint of the dead Christ, I talk about this cult of the dead Christ in the Holbein painting that fascinates Rogojin and Prince, and the idiot Prince. And in my interpretation, the death of Christ is something that excites the male psychosexuality to anguish of death. Contrary to this worship of the dead Christ that men do, the proud beauty Nastasia reveals the secret of the uncanny, which seduces in her look when she describes her favorite painting. It is not the dead Christ, it would be a Christ alone, listening to a child, sign Christ and child, with his hand resting on the child's head and looking far away. A thought as big as the whole world rests in his look. In the look of the child and the look of Christ, they look in the same direction, and it is big as the world. And it is with a thoughtful look, as children can be thoughtful and attentive, that the child look at him. We have here a sublimated and idealized impalpable intimacy of the childhood incestual drama with the older man. As a female alter ego of the idiot, and beyond her refusal of the commercial corruption that perpetuate the outrage done to women, even if they are felt to be superior, Nastasia Philippovna attests that there is no sexual relationship if one understands it as an organic trait. She is against the sexual relationship with Trotsky and with Rogozhin. But she is against even with the non-sexual communion with Mishkin. There doesn't exist sexual relationship between men and women, pretends she. If you want to be safe, you are not in this world. We are in another world. We suicide you. Doesn't exist without each one of us losing in the war of the sexes. You see that the solution of the war of sexes, according to Nastasia Philippovna and Dostoyevsky in this book, is disastrous, nihilistic, pessimistic, melancholic. Dostoevsky could have adopted Alfred de Vigny's fin de siècle verdict, who has been quoted by Marcel Proust too, who says each sex will die on its own way. Nastasia Philippovna does not feel able to face this shame of sex that intoxicates her pride and her whole era, conservative Russia in particular. And since Mishkin turned out to be, all things considered, sublime, their delicious and dramatic sublimatory in ultimate sublimation ultimately condemns these two bachelors of art to the disaster of alienation for him or death for her. For Dostoevsky, the only thing that can save you from the nihilism and the impossibility of sexual relationship and sexual relation between men and women is art, or the personage I'm speaking about, be it Mishkin or Nastasia Philippovna, are bachelors of art, which means they cannot arrive to create art. He, the writer, arrives to do this, and the example of his solution of this war of sexes that he represents as essential and impossible to bypass is the solution that he gives to this situation, which is, of course, not the one that our modernity tries to invent in the human relationship and the difficulty of this solution. He found woman in the stenograph who helped him to write. The narrator constantly instills laughter in this grandiose pathology, even if the situation of the idiot remains dramatic and melancholic with the Nastasia Philippova in particular. But the author of his part experiences frequent epileptic seizures and roulette losses during writing this novel, which is scrupulously recorded in his notebooks for the idiot, together with his stenographer wife, Anna Snitkina. This strange narrator presents himself only as a calligrapher, another bachelor of art, while his devoted wife shelters and preserves the creation of the final text and the novel from these assaults of morbidity on the person and the work of her husband. Anna Snitkina was the one who helped him to conserve his writing and bypass the morbidity, the melancholia, the nihilism, and self-destruction. On the situation, on the condition to be the one who helped him to not be only submitted to him, but admiring him and writing about him a sort of worship after his death. This is to say that Dostoyevsky is not a modern writer following our modern ambitions for equality and freedom for women, but he was able to understand different aspects of this victimization of femininity in the end of the 19th century, be it under the figures of rebellious, politically and emotionally heroines. I'll stop this exploration of the archipelago of the feminine passions by saying that Dostoevsky was able to incorporate these passions, his own passions, his own femininity, in the history of religions and in the explosions of identity as well as of ideologies. And his discordances are not only a rhetorical device, they are a historical truth of his epoch, of his period of time when he wrote the 19th century, but they still maintain their efficiency in the modern war of sexes that is far from being solved. Their undecidable tensions constitute us. It could perhaps survive us and help us to find other solutions. Thank you again for your interest in Dostoevsky and my reading, and I hope you'll read him again in a new perspective. Thank you again.